Alright you guys, so really quick I want to go over applying the border to the plate. So there's a couple quick steps. Like one, again, I want to make sure I don't handle the plate with greasy fingers or anything that has oils, because wherever I touch will print. Obviously if I etch the borders they shouldn't print, and the main reason I'm putting the borders down is that protects that area. You don't necessarily have to paint down a rectangle border, but that's just kind of the traditional, like, picture window image type thing you see in printmaking specifically. But you also will find people who do irregular borders or sort of shaped borders where they're playing with the negative space around their image. All of that is completely acceptable and open. I'm just kind of showing you like the basic way to do it. So this is a plate that's already had the border etch painted on it. Here's the plate I just deoxidized. So I made a couple handy dandy jigs. I have one that's for vertical images. Write that on there right now. Probably spelling vertical wrong. And I have one for horizontal. So depending on whether your image is vertical or horizontal, the window will be a little different shaped. So the outer edge is the size, general size of a quarter sheet of printmaking paper. And then the inner window is the size of your image to have just like a 1.5 to 2 inch, kind of a small border, but still a border nonetheless. So I'm going to set up for vertical. I don't need to be perfectly in the middle, but I want to kind of find center of the plate with my jig here. And then I just want to kind of make sure it's on there straight. And then I'm just going to trace each edge with the number 2 pencil. You can draw on the plates with preliminary sketching with pencil. You just don't want to build it up too much. You want to keep it kind of loose and rough, not a finished drawing. And the reason for that is the graphite, if you put it on too thick, will stop your crayon from sticking, and the etching will kind of ruin your image. But if I wanted to do a sketch on here, I can draw with pencil, and that's not going to show up when I go to print. It's not greasy, so the acid will eat it off, or acid, sorry, the etch will eat it off. These jigs are just on the shelf by the graining sink, so they're easy to find. You can paint the border etch on with a paintbrush. I like to use a sponge because I find that I put a thinner layer. So I have a damp sponge. It's got to be wet and soft, not soaking wet because it's nothing squeezing out of it, but it needs to be damp so that it's soft. And then I've got my border etch, which again is also on the shelf by the graining sink. And so that's aluminum lithoplate border etch, tapum and gum. And so tapum's a mixture of tannic acid and a teeny bit of phosphoric acid, and then the EM stands for etching medium. So it's like tannic acid plate etching medium, I think is what tapum stands for. But it's real minute amounts of acidity, but it's the acid that aluminum responds to in relationship to a grease resist. So it's just sort of fine-tuned for working on acid. You can etch it with straight phosphoric acid. You can etch it with nitric acid. This is just more stable and works better, which is why we use it. So, and gum arabic's just kind of a thick, viscous liquid that is water-soluble. So it dilutes in water. So it's water-loving or hydrophilic. And then the grease crayon is hydrophobic or water-hating. So this is part of how we, part of what we're doing to establish the water-loving, water-hating surface of the plate. So I'm just going to kind of put the sponge against that bottle, the container, and I'm just going to kind of pour/dip the corner into the border etch, and then I'm just going to kind of sponge it on. So the main reason I prefer the sponge over a brush, and you can use brushes, that's totally fine, no judgment, is I feel like I can get a straighter line with the sponge And also a thinner coat. I find that when I use a brush, I put the gum and tape them on a little too thick, and it just takes a lot longer to dry. So if I put a nice thin coat, it still creates that etched border to protect the plate, but it also dries faster because it's a nice thin layer. Obviously, like I mentioned before, I could go with like an organic edge, so if I wanted to like dapple the sponge, I could get almost like a faux sort of finishing texture that happens, or I could use a paintbrush to create brush strokes or brush marks at the edge. All of that is acceptable and doable. It just kind of is up to you. But again, this is kind of more the traditional illustrative print technique, is to make a rectangular window to draw through on the plate. And so I'm just kind of cleaning up or straightening my edge lines just a little bit. Okay. Anywhere where I've missed the plate a little bit, I can just go back and with the sponge and the tape and make sure I get it on there. And there we go. I want to make sure I rinse out the sponge really good. And it should be resting on top or next to the tape-em container. So that's the label on there. That's my sponge, and those are on the shelf by the graining sink. So once this dries in about 10-15 minutes, I should be able to handle it, touch it. It won't be sticky anymore, and I'll be able to draw on it.